So this here is going to be a video on how to paint Lord Arkos. So he's a Forgeworld character from the Forgeworld book. He doesn't have a model, so what we did is we used the Cypher model, and what we've got is him painted up as Alpha Legion. So if you want to do something similar to this, or if you want to see how we painted him up the way we did, please feel free to stay tuned, and we'll go step by step through how we made this video, which colors we used, how we got the cloak the way it is, how we did the armor. And if you find any of this helpful, please feel free to leave a like on the movie or on the video. Leave a comment on the video, like the channel, subscribe to the channel. Anything you can do kind of helps. Otherwise than that, we will see you in a few minutes when we start the painting video. So this is our model here. It's a Cypher model, and what we ended up doing is we did a couple of little changes. Nothing too exciting. We're going to make him a Lord Arkos, so we need a Black Blade of Venom. So we took the large sword that he's got in the back, we shaved off some of the iconography, left the skulls, added 3 more skulls, and then a little spike, and then that was pretty much it. Took off a couple of the Imperial type logos, but all in all, it's pretty much just the model out of the box. And then we didn't glue him to the base. Well, we had, but we removed it because we're going to want to paint the underside of all of these cloaks as best we can before we fix them down, and then we don't have access to them. So we'll start with the priming, which is done. What we did was we sprayed him with Mechanicus Standard Gray, just the overall spray paint, and that's where we're at now. Looks like the normal plastic, but it's not. He's covered with a primer, so it'll make the next coats of paint stick very well. Now, because the model is 80% robes, we're going to start with the robes because that's going to use the most dry brushing and it's going to make the biggest mess, and then we can clean up all around that afterwards. And we're going to put the robes green just because we're doing an Alpha Legion, so it'll be sort of a teal green, similar to the rest of our army. And so what we're going to do first, we're going to do a base coat of Kabalite green, and that'll be our base, which we're going to put all over the model straight out. So we're just going to add the paint, just like that. It's a layer paint and not a base, so we may need a second coat, but it's always good practice to use a watered down paint and put a second coat anyway. So we'll keep doing this, and we'll be back here in a few minutes once it's done. So this is our model now that we've got our base coat of Kabalite green down, and as you can see, we've done 2 coats on it, so we've got some good coverage and good color. So what we're going to do now is add a shade in there, and we're going to put some Coelia Greenshade, which is a bluish green shade. We're going to just spread that on to fill in all of the little gaps and crevices and really add some 3D effect to the model. We'll just take our green shade and we'll just spread it all over like so, and it'll find its way into the crevices. It'll also run downwards, so you'll have it more darker at the bottom of the cloak than at the top, but feel free to help push it along and get it in where you want it. So we'll keep doing this. We'll be back here in a few minutes once that's dried. So there's our model now that all of our shade is dried, and as you can see, we've filled in some of these creases that really stood out, as well as the back of the model and in the creases here, as well as over here. It looks a bit messy, but don't worry, our highlight layer will take care of that. We also came through and did the gun coils because we're going to make those plasma-y or something along those lines. We could have did them grav, but in order for making this a little bit more efficient, we'll go green because everything else is green. So with that, we're going to start our highlight layer. And our first highlight layer is going to use some Sybarite green, which will be just dry brushed right across the cloaks here. So we're just going to dry brush that green on. Lightly at first, and then as we go, it'll all blend. Something like that. So we'll keep going at this, blending it over and over again until we're happy, and we'll be back here in a minute when it's all done. So this is our model now that we finished with the Sybarite green, and as you can see, we did a very strong dry brush on it. So we've really lit up that cloak a lot, and we have left some of the darkness in the folds, but for the most part, the highlight layer has really changed the color and the hue of the the cloak for now. Our next step is to do one more highlight layer, and we're going to do that with some Moot Green, which is even brighter, and that's just going to be one more dry brush right over the model, just hitting the highest points here. So we're just going to dry brush that right over these highlights. You can see the green starting to come out now. And we just need a very light dry brush here. But that'll get us our nice green cloak, which is what we want. So we'll finish dry brushing this and we'll be back here in a few minutes. Here's our model now that we finished with the Moot Green. And as you can see, we've got a very, very green cloak at this point. We're going to go one step further and add one last dry brush edge highlight with Niblet Green, which is just a slight shade off of the Moot Green. I'm just going to dull up some of these edges with it, that's all. Just like so. So we'll keep going at this a little bit and we'll be back here in just a few minutes. So now that we're finished with our cloak, what we're going to do is start working on this Black Blade of Venom that we've got here. And so we're going to take a little bit of Abaddon Black and we're just going to go over all of the hilt as best we can without traipsing over the cloak. So we're just going to be very, very patient and cautious as we go over this. So this is our Black Blade of Venom now that we finished with the Abaddon Black. And what we're going to do is add a little bit of an edge highlight with some Eshen Gray now. So we'll take a little bit of that Eshen Gray. We're just going to gently put it right along the side here, along the edge up here. And along the top here maybe. Just add a little bit of depth to that. Being careful not to go over the cloak. So that'll add a little bit more color to that. And then under the right lighting, it'll look like there's two-tone there. So that's what we're going to finish with that. And then we'll move on from there. So now that our sword is finished, we're going to start working on those skulls since we're already here. So what we're going to do is take a little bit of Rakarth Flesh base. And we're just going to paint up the skulls. Like so. We're also going to paint the face behind the armor, being very careful not to get anything on the hood. And aside from that, we'll be back in a few minutes. So now the skulls are finished with Rakarth Flesh and it's dry. We're going to add a shade of Seraphim Sepia to all of the skulls. Seraphim Sepia is a really nice bone shade, but it's not too dark. But it is definitely brown and it's golden brown tinged, so it definitely looks like yellowed bone as it dries. As you can see there, we're just going to shade those up. And then all the skulls on the rest of the blade as well. So we'll let that dry and we'll be back in a few minutes for the next part. For the face, we're going to do a little bit of shade of Reikland Fleshshade, which was a bit more rosy color compared to the bone. So we'll put that in there now. Make sure it gets in all the crevices where you want it, so that you get the definition that you want. So we'll leave that as it is, and we'll let it dry, and we'll see where we ended up. Now that our shade is dry, these skulls look really, really nice, and you could leave them the way they are, but I'm going to add a highlight layer to them of Screaming Skull, the aptly named skull color. which is great for bone. And we're just going to dry brush that right over the skulls, lighting them back up again. Always sweeping from the top so that the light appears to come from the top. Just like that. We'll clean up the edge of the black of the sword here in a minute, but effectively that's pretty good for our skulls. Now, as far as the face goes, what we're going to do is add a dry brush of Cadian Fleshtone. And it's very, very important we don't go too overboard with this, because we don't want to lose any of the shade that we did. But it's such a tight working space in there. Let's switch to a tiny, tiny, tiny detail brush. And we're using that one instead. And this is the reason we did the face before we did the armor, because we can come over and clean over the armor first, afterwards. So we'll leave that sit for a little bit, and then we'll add our final highlight on the face. We're going to add that one more highlight layer on the face. We're going to do that with some Kislev flesh, which is lighter than the last color. And we're going to use that little tiny brush again. And then just dry brush that. Right over some of the face there. And all we're looking for is the nose, maybe the cheekbones and the chin. So in what's typical for most of our Alpha Legion units, we're going to use the armor with a base coat of Leadbelcher, which is a great metallic base. Gets good coverage and comes out looking quite nice. I'm just going to paint that one right on all of the metallics here. And the sooner we get the armor done, the sooner we can affix them to the base, and then we won't be rubbing off the colors while we're holding it at all the points here. So once we get inside the legs and then finish the armor color, we can glue them and use the actual handle, which will make it a little bit easier to do the fine detail work. So we'll finish with all of the metallics, and we'll be back here in a few minutes once the armor's done. Here's our model now that the Ironbreaker is finished, and you can see it's really starting to come together now. The cloak doesn't stand out quite as much anymore. It looks like it's part of the model, and the armor's starting to look really, really nice. So what we're going to do is a highlight layer over the model, all over all of the armor, just to brighten it up even still. So we're going to put some Runefang steel. Just going to dry brush that right on. And that should add a little bit more brightness to the armor. And we're going to tint all of the armor with a contrast paint anyway, so that'll fill in some of the gaps as well. So all we want to make sure we do is not paint over the cloaks or the bones or the face or anything else that we've taken the time to finish ahead of time. So now that we've got the armor finished, what we're going to do now is add our Alpha Legion tint to it. So we're going to take a little bit of Akhelian green, which is more blue than green, but we're going to just water that down significantly and add a light coating onto all of our armor. And it's a contrast paint. So once it's on, we don't want to touch it. We just want to leave it be. So we just keep doing that, trying to get into all those hard to reach spots. And we'll keep going at this armor, and we'll be back here in a few moments. So here's our model now that we've finished with the Akhelian green. And as you can see, it's very, very reflective blue. So what we're going to do is add a green tinge to that. Now, normally we'd use a different contrast paint. We'd use the Tarragon turquoise. But in this case, I think what we're going to do is try out some Warp Lightning, because that's a brighter green tone, and we're just going to dry brush it, well, it's contrast paint, so we're just going to brush it right over the armor and see what we get. We'll start with the leg here. We'll just sort of dry brush that green right over it. There's the arm. It's watered down quite a bit here, so. So now the armor is finished. We've affixed him to the base, and we're now using the painting stand, which will make things a whole lot easier from this point forward. So the next thing we're going to do is go back over the trim. We're going to do that with some Stormhost silver, which is a little brighter than the Runefang steel we had earlier. Because we do want to make the trim stand out quite a bit. So we're just going to slowly go over all of that. Get all the skull trinkets and the icons and everything else. And we'll meet back here when we're finished. So now our Stormhost silver trim is finished. We're going to move on to a couple more of the little artifacts here. And for that, we're going to take some Liberator gold, which is a very, very light gold. And with that, I'm going to do some clasps that he's got on the front piece of his cloak. Same as on the other side. And then we're going to do, I think, the blade of the hilt of the sword as well. So we'll finish these up and we'll meet back here in a few minutes. So now with our Liberator gold finish, we're going to add a shade to that just to bring out a little bit of depth in things like the buckles here. So we're going to take a little bit of Seraphim Sepia and just dab that right in the spots. Just like so. And we'll do the same for the sword. So now that our shader's dry, we've added a lot of depth to that gold on the sword and on the clasps. So what we're going to do now is, before we add any highlights to any of that, we're going to work on this pistol here. And all we're going to do is take a little bit of Runelord brass, which is more silver than gold. And we're just going to go over the front piece of that gun. It's a master-crafted blaster of some sort, and comes standard on the Cypher model, but we're going to usurp it for something else here. So we want to add a little bit more color to it. Just like so. So we'll do that and we'll be back here in a few minutes. So that's lit up this gun a little bit. What we're going to do now is take a little bit of that Stormhost silver again, and we're just going to go over the trim on that sword. Like so. So we only have a couple of things left to do on our model. One of the things we're going to do is to take some Rhinox hide and then a highlight of Scrag Brown, and we're going to do the holster that's hiding in the cloak here. There's the raw Nox hide. And this is our scrag brown here. And then we're going to work on the hilt of the sword again. We're going to take a little bit of Khorne Red. We're just going to do the hand grip here. Something like that. So we'll keep going at that. We'll be right back. So one of our last steps we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of Druchii Violet Shade, and we're going to do the hilt as well as just the end of the blaster here. Like that for our sword. Just add some of that fired effect. So this is the finished model that we have, and as you can see, we did the base and then we clear coated it. So I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out, and if you like the way it turned out as well, please feel free to leave a comment or a like or subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for a few minutes after this, and you'll see a couple of images from different views so that you can get a good look at what the whole model looks like. Otherwise than that, I hope you had a good time, and we'll see you at our next painting video.